Hi everyone, and welcome to the final day of Decode. So over the last 2 days, you've seen a lot of excellent talks to watch over, and I hope you've had a chance to enjoy many of them. And it's one of these talks that I am going to be using as a launching off point actually, which is the opening keynote from Martin Rosler on day one. So in Martin's talk, he highlighted a lot of the mega trends that we are seeing in society today, brought about by this global pandemic. Martin talked about topics such as the massive switch to working from home, or in fact more than that, working from anywhere. And for many of us, this image captures what our daily working experience is today. Except of course that most of us are not handsome stock photo models like this guy. And there's also a significant lack of kids running around in the background. And maybe it's just me, but I have no idea why he needs the scissors. Anyhow. He also touched on something else that spun out of this work from home shift, and that is more and more of our daily services that we use every day are now moving to the cloud. Now, whether that's in-house applications your company uses or something as simple as Office 365 usage, it actually has big implications on terms of the speed of digitization in many organizations, who are now suddenly running into issues they hadn't thought of, such as data sovereignty. So what do you mean I can't move that European's data from one server to another server in the United States? Or for other countries, the data can't even leave the region. So how do we solve that? And he also talked about the rise of national thinking and how we are living in a world where lies now travel faster than truth, and people even distrust facts and science, a situation which is much better for supporting things like autocracies and dictatorships than it is for supporting democracies. And that includes the whole topic of fake news, which is a topic we wrote about in depth with our team back in 2017. So put all of this together and you see a very changing world indeed. Not only for us to live in, but also for us as defenders to protect in. And all of that Martin covered very well, so I'm going to take a different slant this time. I'm going to look at what effect has this had on cybercriminals. So well, as you might expect, right from the start of the pandemic, criminals have leveraged the early fear and confusion around COVID-19 for their own benefits. And this is just one example of many different spam runs we've seen from different cybercrime groups, in this case claiming to be from UNESCO, and with the traditional approach of a malicious attachment that when opened would install malware on the victim's computer. Criminals also leveraged COVID-19 in other ways too, for example preying on the vulnerable who are trying to get access to relief payments. So instead of these people getting access to much needed funds to help them get through a life where maybe they'd lost their jobs, their entered details would actually get sent to the criminals who would use it to empty out what little savings they had left. And we've even seen COVID-19 themed lock screen ransomware. So needless to say that even though there are no peer-reviewed studies on this yet, and that in today's world you should always double check facts from any sources, I'm going to go out on a limb here and state that I strongly believe coronavirus cannot actually spread to a computer unless you count, of course, the fact that we should wipe down our keyboards every day, which we all definitely do, right? And in fact, over the first half of the year, we saw a noticeable spike in the number of COVID-19 related attacks, as you would expect. And when you look at the volumes, it's gone down a bit since the heyday of early April, but you do see some big numbers with several million shown here. And this is similar for things like malware and business email compromise and websites and so on. So should companies be worried about this? Well, frankly, no. For example, here is the number of COVID URLs shown here on the right-hand side, versus overall malicious sites for the last couple of months. I checked, and last month alone, malicious COVID sites made up a whopping 0.1% of all malicious sites we saw. Now, I don't have a ratio handy for email, but trust me, it's low. It's very low. So should you be worried about COVID lures and volumes increasing in attacks? Well, only if you're responsible for maintaining marketing slides like this one, to be honest. But it is worth calling out so people are aware of the reality of what's going on. One thing that may be worth noting is the impact it has had on criminals themselves, however. So like the rest of us, we found out that criminals also have a hard time adapting to lockdown in their parts of the world. And now, while we were all, we were unable to find out what Netflix shows they're binging or if they got any better at making sourdough bread than the rest of us did, we do know they passed their time in other ways. Online poker tournaments between criminals became very popular, and bizarrely, on Russian-speaking forums, poetry contests and often rap battles were also quite popular. I'd love to tell you that being good at extorting money from people makes you skilled at rhyme, but having read through a lot of that stuff, I promise that most definitely is not the case. Now, all of this seems fun, of course, until you think for a minute, well, what can they win in these competitions? And it varies a lot, but we've seen stolen credit card details, we've seen dumps of victim data, bots on compromised victim machines. Or in other words, while the rest of the world was struggling through a pandemic, criminals gambled with the lives of those who were most affected for their own personal amusement and to relieve some boredom and stress. One of the other trends Martin had mentioned was the move of much of what we do today in the daily business world to the cloud. So your office documents, your internal work applications, collaboration tools. In today's work from home setup, it's making less and less sense for us all to VPN back into an office that frankly doesn't exist anymore. It makes much more sense for us to go directly to the resources that we need. So how is this change being seen on the criminal side? Are they actively creating cloud-specific malware or attacks? Well, again, actually, no, not really. Or at least it's more accurate to say it's in its infancy. So we absolutely are seeing attackers seizing control of misconfigured cloud services and then using them for their own benefits, or often as a beachhead to find their way into the rest of the corporate network. And recently we have also seen more use of criminals off the cloud to help them process the vast quantities of data that they're stealing. And an upcoming research in that entitled Cloud of Logs will be coming pretty soon. But we don't see them building much in the way of cloud-specific attacks or ones that take advantage of the cloud as of yet. So why is this? And are we wrong about these changes? Well, absolutely not. But to understand, you need to go a layer deeper. So this is a very stereotypical cloud web app. In fact, it's straight out of one of Amazon's examples. You have some EC2 instances, which are load balanced. They have an S3 bucket behind them for file storage, and then a database and a notification service. So from your point of view, as the defender, this is a whole different ballgame compared to protecting a traditional bare metal server. There are a lot more different components here and settings and so on to protect against, and you normally will want to have as small a footprint as possible on each of them. So you don't want to install a heavy duty AV that will slow down all the scalability benefits you get from the cloud. So you probably have some sort of cloud aware agentless security installed here. And this is actually a really simple cloud setup. It's going to get a lot more complex when you factor in things like serverless computing or containers and so on. But now change your view for a minute and look at this from an attacker's point of view. And what do you see? Well, you see a domain name, you see an IP address, you see a server with some computing resources, file storage, and a database. There's literally almost no difference for the attacker to attack this versus attacking a traditional bare metal server. And let's check back on our handsome work from home employee here, who by now, unfortunately, his coffee has sadly gone cold. But he doesn't care because in his house, apparently every day is Christmas time. Who knew? So his company's IT department is dealing with a nightmare. That work laptop you see there is on the exact same home network as his partner's work laptop, who, just for fun, let's imagine happens to work for the biggest competitor that you have. To make matters worse, This smart TV over here is running an unpatched version of Android that the IT department has absolutely no rights or ability to do anything about. But what makes this, for the attacker point of view, what does this new normal type of network look like to them? Well, actually, it's no different really to what it was in the past. For them, this is just a couple of Office PCs on the same network as some easy to compromise unpatched machines like the TV. So they simply compromise one device and then they move laterally around the network the way they always have. Except now they can hit multiple corporate networks all at once. So think about what this means. The world we live in absolutely is changing drastically, as you heard earlier in the week. But if attackers change literally nothing, it is still significantly harder for us to defend than it was pre-COVID. We need to make new investments and deploy new approaches just to stay still. So this week, you would also have heard about other changes affecting the technology industry. The end of globalization, the rise in digitization, cloud, and the changing workplace we already mentioned. Throw in the effects of artificial intelligence in the mix, and even leaving aside COVID for a minute, the last couple of years have felt like an onslaught of change. So why is that? It's because you are living through the early periods of a massive revolution in the timeline of the human race, on a scale that has really only been seen since the Industrial Revolution. So this is really hard to see for us from the inside though, and because it is happening at a pace that you normally only see in history books. So the Industrial Revolution actually lasted from about 1760 to around 1830, so 70 years or so. Our current revolution is happening at a faster pace than that, but it still has drastic effects on humanity as other revolutions will have. So thinking about this change and the turmoil can easily make you feel depressed, but don't. When you look at the news every day, it is crammed full of doom and gloom, as bad news story follows other bad news story. But that's because it sells better than good news. Over the last couple of years, we have seen more progress in things like gender equality, neurodiversity, more sustainable foods, massive advances in medicine and science, and much, much more. In fact, in almost every single major revolution in the past, it eventually led to lower mortality rates, more equality, and drops in crime rates. This is what humanity does, like the phoenix rising from the proverbial flames, if you like. So, what about cybercrime? What's the next cybercrime revolution going to look like? Will we see IoT devices hacked, like this baby monitor here? Or are our cars going to be compromised and driven off the roads? Or maybe medical implants being targeted by ransomware, for example? Well, no, none of these, really, to be honest. Do you know what all of these have in common? All of them are essentially security conference stunt hacks. You see, crime doesn't have revolutions, it has evolution. If you look at the top crimes of the Industrial Revolution, and you will find that there were theft, violent crimes like murder and sexual assault, and fraud. What do we have today? Same things really, right? But how criminals carry them out, of course, has evolved a little bit, and cybercrime is no different. So to understand why cybercrime will not go through, a major revolution, you need to understand the mindset of cyber criminals. So criminals are not people looking to change and create a new world, for good or for bad. Criminals are simply the parasites that feed on society, putting in just enough effort for their own gains and no more. They make the minimum changes they need in order to survive, or in other words, the more things change, the more they stay the same. As technically skilled as some cyber criminals are, they tend to have quite a limited imagination. They simply look at new opportunities that arrive in society and then breed their existing approaches with them, mutating almost like a virus to better suit the new host. So let's take an example that you all should know. 2017 was considered by many in the security industry to be the year of ransomware. This is when ransomware really came into its own as a criminal business model. Now, malware families like CryptoWall and TeslaCrypt made millions of dollars for their creators. And this was a highly successful time for cyber criminals because they realized they could expand from their traditional theft-based business models to include a different type of crime, extortion. You see, the big problem with theft and being a cyber criminal is when you steal a victim's data, you then need to sell it, and otherwise it's worthless. Now, for some data, such as bank account records, credit cards, and other accounts of value, it's fairly obvious where you could sell that and profit from it. But what about a company's intellectual property or their source code or acquisitions data? That's got to be valuable, right? But who do you sell that to if you stole it? Well, the genius of ransomware was that by definition, that data is valuable to the victim. And if you extort that, you will extort the fact that you would permanently destroy it, they will pay, because saving the attackers all the hassle in the process of having to find a buyer themselves. A year or so after this, over in Europe, the EU launched a new law that would have wide-reaching effects, GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. This legislation imposed very heavy fines of up to 4% of the revenue of a company that was shown to have any breaches of Europeans' data. So what happens? Well, the cyber criminals slowly evolved. They took their existing working business model and then they bred with this new opportunity in society to create what today we would call doxware. In fact, as normally happens, they were actually slower to do this than we expected. Trend Micro included this happening in our 2017 predictions, but it wasn't really until about the second half of 2019 that this really gathered some steam and criminals started to use it. So doxware is a simple evolution on top of the classic ransomware business model that takes advantage of a change in society. You see, while the extortion model of ransomware has great advantages over theft, like we said earlier, it has a fatal flaw: backups. If you have good backups, ransomware becomes a lot less of a problem. It's still painful to clean up, but it's no longer a company-ending event when you get hit by it. But now they could add a third category of crime to the mix: blackmail, which is actually different than extortion. So if you don't pay to get your data back because they have a copy of it, you have a copy of it anyhow, but you would pay so that they don't post it all over the internet, so all your customers lose faith in you, your competitors get access to all that data, and you start to get a phone call from your local data protection commission. Of course people will pay for that. So this cybercrime trend has made even more money than ransomware itself did. Just one of the NetWalker malware's Bitcoin wallets totaled up to about $25 million US, and the ransom amounts just keep going up and up as companies are paying them. And by the way, just like a real-world virus, the old strains and the old approaches don't actually go away. They just die out in the process. So non-doxware, traditional ransomware if you like, is still a very big problem today. In fact, we saw more new ransomware families in the first 6 months of this year than in the previous 2 6-month periods. But that simply doesn't get reported on in the main technology media because it's not sexy enough. However, we really have a systematic problem on our hands here. And all of this was very, very predictable. Let's make some more predictions. 2 more examples. We'll take our doxware this time as a starting point, and we'll look around society for a growing opportunity that it could breed with. So here's one: the whole area of deepfakes and fake news. So what would the offspring of these two look like? Well, how about the idea of deepfake ransomware? Simply put, this business model would work like this. The attacker uses stolen pictures of the victim and combines them with an incriminating video using off-the-shelf deepfake technology. All of this is sadly pretty trivial to do. Finally, the attacker simply starts a countdown of 24 to 48 hours, as is common for ransomware, includes a link to the currently public but not yet released video, and a Bitcoin address to receive payment. If they don't pay before the deadline, the video gets made public or sent to all of the person's contacts. Now imagine one of your favorite politicians, if you have a favorite politician, And imagine a video of them dropping the day before polling day in an important election. What impact would that have? Or to be more accurate, how much would they be willing to pay to a pretty much untraceable payment system like Bitcoin in order to make sure that video never appears? Quite a lot in a lot of cases. And again, all of this is very, very predictable. Almost like you'd expect to have heard all of this before. Much like my presentation, sadly. Which is because it is. I already actually talked about deepfake ransomware at Decode last year. And since I was so entertaining, it's probably vividly painted in all of your memories. So why repeat an idea now a year later? Well, it's definitely not because I got this far into my presentation before realizing that I was reusing last year's material. Promise. It's because, like our prediction of Doxware back in 2017, sometimes these things take longer to actually materialize for attackers than we would originally have thought. It's how these things always play out. When there's an opportunity and a point to evolve from, the criminals will always make that jump, even if it's slower than sometimes folks like us expect. Actually, that's a weird position to be in as a researcher, where on one side you are really thankful that criminals haven't figured out all the details to make this work yet, but on the other side, there's a strange part of you internally screaming, seriously people, what's taking you so long? So let's go over one more marriage made in hell. We take the existing trend of IoT malware, which today is almost exclusively malware that compromises home routers and uses them for DDoS attacks. And then again, we search around and we find a major trend in society today. This time, the whole movement to working from home. After all, the home is now the key access point to corporate data. So putting these together, and what do we get? What's the next generation look like? Well, suddenly that humble router in the home is not just an easy to hack computer. It is the perfect interception point for a number of crimes. A sort of smart home hub for criminals. For starters, a router will not have any security products installed, which means that once they are hacked, they are permanently hacked. They are also perfect anti-forensics devices. You simply reset that router and all the logs will vanish, which is leaving nothing of value for a law enforcement investigator. And add further woe to that investigator, it is trivial for criminals to switch from a DDoS business model to proxy as a service, so that the last hop of all criminal attacks in the near future will come from compromised home IP addresses of innocent victims. You combine those two and good luck investigating that. But the change to work from home suddenly gives this business model what it's been missing up until now, and that is a financial reason to exist. So you see, a year ago, the home was full of, well, home users. And as interesting as we all are, we're not sitting around with millions in our bank accounts, but the companies we work for are. So expect these router malware to evolve to automatically inventory your network, and by simply installing some SSL certificates on compromised machines within the network, they can build up a complete list of every online account accessed from the home. So your emails, your Netflix accounts, Amazon, your bank, your LinkedIn. And they don't even need to crack the passwords here. That's not the point. The point is to then sell this as a service, a sort of criminal social network, where other criminals can simply search for targets very precisely across all of that account data. So if you want to only search, for example, for CEOs in the Philippines, it's very simple to do if you've got intercepted LinkedIn data. Then the criminal simply pays to rent access to the home networks of those individuals and carries out whatever attacks they feel like. A sort of criminal Internet of Things, if you like. So if you want to amuse yourself for the evening, go ahead and do this a few times yourself. It's surprising what you will come up with. Simply put, existing crime model plus societal change equals profit. Let's try it out. Now, all of these small evolutions, there's no drastic big changes coming here. So we're okay, right? Well, sadly, that's not how it works. Do you know some other things that don't change drastically every year? The size of the hole in the ozone layer from depletion of ozone gases. or the levels of radiation at the site of the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster. Both of these have been pretty static for decades now, but that doesn't mean that they're not disastrously bad. Sometimes really bad things can stay consistently bad for a very long time, and cybercrime is no exception to that rule. In fact, if anything, it's actually increasing. Now, why is that? Well, this is a screenshot of the most wanted list of FBI cybercriminals. In total, there are 95 people listed on it. And to make matters worse, none of these have been arrested. Otherwise, there wouldn't be much point in having a wanted poster for them, now would there? And also, these are only the ones that law enforcement have been able to actually figure out, which is a tiny percentage of the overall list of cyber criminals that we have in the world today. So if you take any crime you like to think of, and if there are no arrests and no real deterrent for carrying out the crime, how is it ever going to get anything other than worse? And this is not even really law enforcement's fault, genuinely. Cybercrime is the most technically complex type of crime in the world, and it is very poorly understood at government levels around the world also. Only a few countries actually have laws that have substantial penalties for it, and to make it worse, it is always international in nature. If you think of like countries keeping down murder rates, after all, the victim, the scene of the crime, and the attacker are all going to be in their country. And there's laws going back hundreds of years to deal with it. But in cybercrime, the victim, the attacker, and the scene of the crime may often be in different countries, and the laws will be a few years old and probably already out of date. And there's one other category of crime that is comparable in levels of sophistication and international reach, and that's drug smuggling. So how well has humanity collectively dealt with that one, can you think? Not great. So what can we do? And by we, I mean everybody watching this video, the wider global security community. Well, there are several things. First, we can all work together to do everything possible to make the world a safer place for all of us today than it was yesterday. In fact, I would say that's the responsibility of anybody working in this industry. And just like you should be safe to walk down your street at home without the worry of being mugged or killed, you should be able to go online, meet friends, shop with the same level of safety. Now, of course, there are going to be some side alleys you would be smart to avoid in the real world, and the internet is no different. But if people take basic precautions, they should not be able to become a victim. Secondly, we are now living in a world where you can work from anywhere. And what that means is that as long as you can get online and you don't mind working in a certain time zone, you can be based here in Manila or wherever you are in the world, working for a company on the other side of the globe. And the global jobs market hasn't quite fully realized that yet, but for tech workers, these opportunities are going to get equalized across the world. So I would actually strongly encourage global companies to expand their reach and hire in countries that would normally never consider before, and especially countries that are known to have a high risk of people getting involved in cybercrime. These people often come with skill levels that you cannot find in your own region, but they had no outlet for that, and no opportunities in their local economy for jobs to let their talent shine. So they turned to crime. We can stop that, and we can help these people become assets to help us rather than the adversaries we need to defend against. But even if we do all of these things, cybercrime will never ever end. You might hear politicians talk about war on crime. That's a terribly inaccurate phrase. Wars end. Crime is a part of human nature. It has always been a part of humanity, and it always will be a part of humanity. But that is not to say we're all doomed and that things can't get better. In fact, I am absolutely positive that they will get better. Because right now, all of us are living through this major revolution. And like in every revolution in history, humanity goes through a period of uncertainty and change. And then, from those flames, like the phoenix bird of legend, we rise up, we transform, we elevate. Everyone, thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of Decode 2020.